Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We are adults talking about cool stuff. This is ATACS episode number 39. After a lengthy vacation, I am your host, Paul from Atlanta, back from seeing family, which is kind of what you do when you get into the middle of summer and you have nothing else to really do other than just go see people. So joining me on our illustrious panel today is Mr. Will from Greenville, North Carolina. Hello, Will.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm awake.
Okay, how's your? I mean, we are recording this a little bit earlier than normal. How's your caffeination and hydration levels?
Hydration is at maximum. Caffeination is at minimum.
Okay, well, maybe you should do something with that. Then again, mine's also at minimum, so it'd be a quiet, more reserved podcast. How about that?
Understandable.
And also, we have joining us Mr. Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hello, Mr. Flex.
My hydration levels are off the charts. I'm going to have to go pee every 5 minutes.
Okay, well, that's going to be a problem as far as breaks. Don't quite have that in the show notes broken out that way, but you just do you, man.
Take us with you because
I don't need to break to pee. I'll just do it right here.
I want to hear your stream quality. You know what I mean?
Whoa, guys. Gross.
Whoa.
Welcome to ATACS.
All right. We're going to move on from that. That last deep voice that you heard with Mr. Ryan from New York City, New York. Hello, Ryan. How are you?
Hello, Paul. I am good.
Excellent.
I am caffeinated. I have
good
coffee right in front of me as we speak.
All right. So there's coffee, there's water, there's too much water, and there's also video games. And we are going to talk about those. And, I think the first place that I want to start is with our indie correspondent, Mr. Will. You've been playing many games. You put a whole list. I don't know what any of them are. So why don't you talk about some Arkham Knight first, and then we'll move into the indie section?
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah. The word is that people are interested in hearing about this game that came out 3 years ago now.
I'm interested in
that long. Wow,
it's been a while. I'm interested in hearing what you thought about that game, Will.
Well, so I was thinking to myself, maybe it's probably 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and I was like, you know what, I haven't played in a while. It's one of these third-person sort of stealth games, a la Splinter Cell-y type situations. And I was like, those Batman games seem to have a little bit of that, when you're stalking from, gargoyle to gargoyle and crawling through vents, and all that sort of situation. And so I guess I was like, well, let's try this Arkham Knight out, because I had played Arkham Asylum, and I liked it pretty well. And I played City, and, City was a little more bloated. I was always looking everywhere I flew. There was some green Riddler trophy that was like looking at me. And I was like, well, let's give this night a go. And so I did that. And, I will say I enjoyed my time with it. It was not really what I was looking for, but that doesn't mean that it was bad. There were still certainly some of the Predator sections. But I kind of enjoyed it overall. I went through and did just about everything except for any of the Riddler trophies. There's this one main enemy that you fight called the Arkham Knight, and he's got a number of things that he tries to do to the city. So he puts bombs all over the place. He has these checkpoints. He has these watchtowers. And he also has these convoys. So he's got tons of stuff that you can deal with. And I dealt with the towers and the checkpoints, but not the bombs or the APCs.
Okay.
Or whatever.
Oh, the bombs, you had to do those in the Batmobile, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And you had to, upload a virus to them and then defend yourself against, 50 drones and then put power into them until they disarmed or something. And I started doing some of those, and then I ran into one that was just absolutely insane. And even throughout the end of the game, I never really found a good way to get away from being targeted. So there are two different types of enemies that can target your Batmobile and shoot like seeking missiles at it.
Okay.
And I had an ability that was like an EMP that would knock them to the ground. And apparently you could shoot them, but I never had any success doing that. And I don't know, maybe I just probably wasn't very good at it, but you could only use the EMP every once in a while. So I was always getting obliterated by heat-seeking missiles when I was in the Batmobile. So,
well,
go ahead.
I mean, to be fair, heat-seeking missiles, they're kind of hard to shake. You know, they can just follow you
Right.
around. And you got that big jet right on the back of the Batmobile. It's pretty easy to home in on.
Yeah. I will say my favorite parts of it, the thing that was the most like what I wanted was probably the Two-Face missions. There's some missions in there where he's trying to rob a bunch of banks, and you go into the bank, and basically it's a big Predator mission where you're sneaking around through vents, and there's all kinds of things in the banks that you can use to help you out. Like there are these like inkjet things that shoot these little clouds of stuff that can sort of you can use for cover. There are chandeliers for some reason, and you can trigger those chandeliers to drop.
Okay.
Dude, these are Gotham City banks. Of course they're going to have chandeliers.
I mean, these are pretty classy banks. So those are probably my favorite parts. The other things I felt like were probably highlights were the Creature of the Night missions, where there's another Batman who's a little bit more literal, and you get to figure out what his deal is and why he's flying around the city.
Oh.
And then there's a mission sequence called The Perfect Crime, where you find these victims strewn around in the city, and whenever you get near them, there's opera music, and you have to kind of figure out exactly where they are. And then when you're there, it's a really, really easy kind of game. Like you have to scan them using your all kinds of detective modes. And so you've got like a surface mode that scans their skin, another mode that scans their muscles, and another mode that scans their bones. And usually there's one sort of unique identifier on each layer. And you use those, and it'll let you know, Batman can scan his universal database of people or whatever and figure out exactly who this victim was.
Right.
But that made you feel a little bit more like a detective, because you're supposedly, you're Batman.
Yeah.
I will say that his tools to me, I don't know, maybe I'm gaining a little bit less tolerance for the whole Batman thing, but like for some reason, maybe more so than this one than last one, like the Batarang and then the gel that is in a bat and his line launcher, like for some reason, I mean, they're all semi-effective in their own ways, but most of the time I ignored all those tools. I mean, sometimes you have to use them, but it just comes off as super cheesy. So I don't know, maybe I had much more trouble suspending my disbelief and being the Batman this time around. But I still really like some of the additions I thought were really cool. So there's a vocal, what do you call it? I don't know, like a vocal tool that you can basically, at different times in the game, you're able to take sound samples from the enemies, the main bosses, and code them into this vocal coder.
Oh, okay.
And
so it's like a voice duplicator thing?
Yeah, and you can actually order enemies to do stuff. So there are times where you need to get through gates and there's not really a good way to do it. And so you pull out your little vocal coder and have Harley Quinn or whoever it is tell the guys to open the gate, and she's like, "Open the gate!" Or you can tell them to move and check out stuff. So you might have Scarecrow's guys go and check out a generator, and he's like, "Check out that generator." And then when they get near the generator, you blow it up or whatever, so that was kind of funny. There's also a hacking device that you can use, which I think the hacking device was probably in the other games, but it's been a while for me. But I thought that was cool. So there are a lot of electronics and things that you can sort of tamper with and goof with. But after I finished it, I was like, I saw all these stories that were called Gotham City Stories or something, and there are all these DLCs, and I think people as a whole might have been underwhelmed by the DLC offerings for this game, but I saw that there was a season pass for $20, and even though I bought the game for $8, so this was not a business decision, I went ahead and bought the season pass thing, and it had probably 6 different missions in it where you played as other characters. So there's one where you play as Nightwing, one where you play as Robin, Catwoman, Harley Quinn, someone called the Red Hood, and Batgirl. So there's a bunch of them, and then there's a pack that has that basically expands the main game, and you have missions that involve people like Mr. Freeze and Ra's al Ghul, or whatever they call him.
Ra's al Ghul.
There you go. And then the Killer Croc and the Mad Hatter. And so I played through all that stuff and sort of a big old extravaganza. And so a lot of that stuff is kind of fun. They give you a little bit more detail on the different characters. My favorite ones were probably there's one where you play as Harley Quinn, which is actually pretty great. And so she basically, of course, doesn't care about doing anything quiet. And so, like, at one point, you enter, like, a quote-unquote predator section, and you're working for the Penguin at the time, and he's like, Harley, you're going to want to be quiet. And she's like, quiet's not in my vocabulary. And so he goes up there, and you sneak up behind an enemy, and the trigger pops up on the screen, and it says loud takedown. Like, there's no silent takedown. And you just, like, whack them with a bat. And so that's pretty great. Also,
that's pretty great.
She's got these jack-in-the-boxes that she can put down and, like, wind up. And so you can put the jack-in-the-box down, wind it up, and then move out of the way, and then, like, trigger it, and it'll, like, make all this noise, and the guards will walk up to it, and then it'll, like, do its little song and then explode. And so so she's kind of fun. And then she's got her own kind of detective mode, but it's called, like, psychosis mode. And so there's a little Easter egg, because apparently, Harley was actually a psychiatrist for the Joker at one point. And so when you're in that mode, apparently if you stay in it long enough, then you start hearing Harleen or whatever, the actual scientist, trying to sort of break back through. And so it's almost like this sort of internal conflict with Harley where, but that's it's not like a prominent part of the DLC, but it's just like a little Easter egg piece. But that was pretty cool. The other DLC that I wanted to mention, this is probably the last thing I'll have to say about it, unless anyone has some questions, is I played the Catwoman DLC, which was called The Riddler's Revenge. In the main game, the Riddler kidnaps Catwoman, and so she's got a bone to pick. And first of all, her Predator section is awesome because she has these claws that she can walk around in the ceiling, and so that creates a lot of awesome opportunities to do stuff, to take down enemies. And then but then there's this part at the very end of the DLC. It's actually the last thing you do. That is one of the hardest things that I think I've probably ever tried to do in anything. And so I've got this video I post on the channel, but I've got 15 minutes of me losing at this thing, which is actually, and it ended up taking me 35 or 40 minutes to actually finish it. So it was absolutely horrible. But I guess it was nice to have a challenge. I don't know. The game, I suppose, assumed that you'd already beat the main game if you're even going for these DLCs. Right. So I guess maybe that was why they kind of turned it up. But anyway, so that's most of what I probably would say about it.
So I do have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
You played this on console, right?
Yeah, PS4.
Okay, because I know I was pretty sure that, and I was Googling while you were talking, this was the game that came out with just the horrible Windows port that basically was unplayable for portions of that game.
That's kind of what I heard. Plus, my computer is not like super duper new, so most things that I can find on PS4, I'll play on PS4. Now that proved to be a very bad decision when I played Prey because it had eternal load times. But a lot of times, you know that the game is designed to run specifically on a PS4, whereas PCs vary a lot. So that's kind of why I gravitate towards the playing it on the console.
Makes sense. So the main game, that was like, what, a 30-hour or so?
It was pretty lengthy. I don't know exactly what my time is because it doesn't keep it as handy as Steam, but I'm sure. I mean, it's really the only thing I've played single player for the past 2 or 3 weeks, or 2.5 weeks at least. So it's pretty long, but I also haven't played as much probably as I usually do.
I got you. All right.
Did you find, you mentioned at the top that you thought Arkham City was a little too bloated compared to Arkham Asylum. Did you think this game scaled it back any, or was similarly, or even more like?
Well, I guess
expanded in scope than City, or
I think maybe it was the Batmobile stuff. Like there were a lot of pieces to that. So there are puzzles where you have to shoot this winch on the Batmobile and pull walls down, or you can actually like grab something and then use this cord to like suspend your Batmobile. So there are puzzles where you shoot the winch and then you actually back your Batmobile off the side of a building, and then you actually use the guns to shoot something else somewhere else. And so I guess I felt like maybe the Batmobile kind of added a little bit of freshness to it.
Okay.
I can't say that, like, if I would have known maybe on the out front that there was so much Batmobile that would have excited me as much as it, as maybe doing the stealth piece. But, I probably enjoyed Arkham Knight more than Arkham City, but it also could be that it's been so long since Arkham City. I mean, I think I played that on 360. And so that was at least like 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, the game came out in 2011, so depending on how close to release you played it.
Yeah, so it's been a while since I've been the Batman.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I guess I was curious what like the main difference between City and this one was, because I did not play a ton of Night, but from what I remember, it was at least as big as City. And I guess the main differentiator for me is I absolutely despised every part of the game where I used the Batmobile.
Right. Yeah, and I can't say that was the case for me. And I don't know if they tightened it up over time with some patches. I mean, I heard a lot of people say that the Batmobile combat wasn't good, and I mean I didn't think it was bad. It wasn't a type of gameplay that I usually gravitate towards, but I didn't feel like it was awful, But
I think it's kind of neat that like where you come down on Arkham Knight is where one of the reasons I wanted to hear about this game is because I feel like it was kind of controversial, semi-controversial. I mean, like I remember, and for myself, like looking at my game of the year, I think it was 2015?
Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I was like, it managed to squeak its way like onto the bottom of my list, because when I sat back from it, I was like, well, this game did try to do a lot, and you talked about a lot of different gameplay modes, some which you liked and some which you didn't, and I remember like when I sat back from it, I was like, yeah, I didn't like the Batmobile sections, and I think the story they really leaned in to making that like a lot of the main quest.
And
you kind of had
to Scarecrow. So if you're not interested in hearing from the Scarecrow,
yeah, and like you kind of have to find the parts that you enjoy. But like when I stepped back from it, I was like, yeah, actually, like I did enjoy like a lot of the stuff that I did. Like I thought, the Batmobile was actually kind of fun for driving around, and like gliding around the city was fun, and like the combat was still fun. I mean, it was probably they probably put too many mechanics in it, but you could still just get in and kind of mash your way through beat 'em up style. Like, and I also like, I guess I don't want to spoil anything, but I also like the sort of the comic book nods they had at the ending.
I did like the quote unquote twist, I guess, at the end. I thought
those, and they had some kind of fun quotes and stuff like that at the end, which I think the story was also a little weak throughout, but they wrapped it up better than I expected.
One thing that I did think was a little ridiculous is, so at the very end of the game, after you've finished kind of the main quest line, it's like if you want to activate and I don't know if this is a spoiler. I mean, I don't read comics, so it certainly isn't for me, but it's like, do you want to activate the Nightfall protocol? And if you do, you need to finish taking out 5 more villains, and each one of the main or the side quest lines kind of is involving a certain villain. And so you do that, and then the game is like, okay, way to go. And it shows you this little video, and then it's like, if you want to see the complete Nightfall protocol, you need to finish everything. So that means like all those Riddler trophies and everything like that. And I was like, you cheeky game. Trying to make me do Riddler trophies. I'm not doing that.
I actually remember a lot of people being upset about that at the time.
I feel like I did the first one too. And then watched YouTube for the other one.
There you go. No one wants to do 200 and something Riddler trophies, but they're kind of mean about it too, because if you're traversing the city and you haven't done those,
Yeah.
The Riddler guy will start talking to you over whatever loudspeakers he's got in the city, and he's like, "Doesn't it bother you? All these trophies undone, all these trophies unfound and riddles unsolved." And I'm like, man, there are certain people I know who would be really weak to that sort of thing because of their OCD. It's like,
Right.
That's so manipulative.
yeah. But anyway, so that was that one. That was the Arkham Knight.
All right, and so now after playing in the AAA realm, we're gonna move into some indie stuff. So what would you like to talk about? Will, you've listed several indie games here.
Yeah, I think the one I kind of want to talk about the most is actually Hotline Miami 2. I don't know if anyone wants to hear about that, but
Sure.
I don't have too much to say about it. The other two games that I've played most recently are just not interesting. I mean, they're kind of fun, but they're just not. There's nothing interesting about them. So to me, Hotline Miami 2 seems like the one to kind of chat about for a minute.
Also from 2015.
There you go. So, I mean, we're playing the old school. And this was another game that actually I decided to kind of revisit because, when it first came out, much like Arkham Knight, the reception actually was not as good as the first game. And a lot of the things I read made it sound like the parts of the game that were more difficult than the first game were difficult for really irritating reasons, like, getting shot off the screen and stuff like that. And in the game, like, you have this sort of viewpoint thing where you can hit, on the keyboard, if you're playing keyboard and mouse, which I don't know if that's the only way to play it or not, but you hit shift and it kind of shoots your view out in front of you. And a lot of times you have to do that to make sure you're not about to get shot off screen. And so I did have to make generous use of that mechanic in this game. A lot of times I'd actually go into rooms I'd cleared and push my face into the wall and then hit shift just to make sure I could see everything that was kind of coming. So that was a little bit irritating. The other thing that was kind of ridiculous is there are a lot of what I might call I don't know, to me it feels a little bit artificial in terms of the difficulty.
Yeah.
So there are certain characters that you play with that refuse to use guns. And when your enemies have shotguns and machine guns, that can be a little ridiculous. There's one guy there's a soldier that you play as different times during the game, and he has a machine gun that he starts with, and you have a certain amount of ammo with it. You can't pick up any of the enemy weapons, but you can use their ammo caches that you find. And so it's one of these things where there are times where you just can't use the weapons that to me, it just didn't really make a lot of sense. I'm like, this seems like it's taking place during Vietnam, can my guy not figure out how to pick up an AK and pull the trigger?
Right.
But I guess it was kind of fine. The thing that I did think was better in this one, or at least to me, it did seem a little bit better, was there are kind of levels that seem kind of, I guess, puzzly. So there are big enemies. There's this one scene where you're trying to escape a prison, and there are these really, really big dudes who, I guess they've just been working out nonstop in the prison. And as soon as you see them, they run twice as fast as you move, jump on you, and then grab your head and start just beating it into the ground. and that's pretty much it for you. I mean, there's no coming back from that.
It doesn't sound like there's much coming back from that.
Yeah.
No.
And so they actually were kind of immune to it seemed like weapons fire and most weapons. So, but the funny thing is there were these green shivs that you could get from other prison enemies, and that seemed to be the only thing that could take them out. And the shiv was fine as long as you were holding it, but if you accidentally threw it down, it seemed like it would shatter. I guess it was made out of some sort of glass. And so it was kind of like you really had to plan, because you didn't really want to run into a guy with a gun with the shiv, but you also needed to have the shiv if you were going to get spotted or you're going to try to take down one of these big dudes. And there were a couple levels that had big guys like that kind of required a little bit of different strategy. So maybe you needed a certain weapon to really take them out reliably.
Right.
And you had to kind of survey the level, see which enemy had that weapon, kind of devise a strategy to get to them so you could get to the weapon that you needed to take down the big guy. And so I like that sort of stalking, puzzly action gameplay. And it was definitely just as intense as the first one. there was one level that sucked because you had to control two characters at once. There was another thing that kind of stunk was that the story didn't make any sense, which I guess it never does in Hotline Miami. It never really added up to anything, and I think it was like out of chronological order too. So it already didn't make sense, and then you're like going backwards and forwards through time. But but I guess I was looking for something that was like one of these sort of difficult, intense experiences, and I guess it kind of met that need. Although, go ahead.
Did you feel like the level design and like scenario design was as strong as the first game?
Not consistently. There were some that were cool. Like there's a bank robbery at one point, which is pretty great. There are some times where you're like running through the jungles and taking out these military camps. I thought that stuff was cool. One other thing I haven't mentioned is, I don't know, I've read some reviews of this thing and people were saying that they felt like the music was, just as good. And I did not feel that way at all. I felt like the first game's music was heads and shoulders, like a lot better than this.
I am totally with you on that. I remember reading the same thing, and when I played Hotline Miami 2, I'm like, what are people talking about? Like, this is not like, there's nothing like hydrogen in this game.
Right. There's some really, if you haven't listened to the soundtrack from the first Hotline Miami, I mean, it might be a weird thing to enjoy separate from the game because there's a certain sort of like surreal quality to the whole thing. This sort of hyper violent, pixelated violence.
That first game soundtrack is like one of those legendary video game soundtracks. Like it is incredible.
It really goes with what you're doing, because what you're doing is kind of, it seems like you're almost like navigating this incomprehensible, surreal dreamscape. And then the music sort of has this sort of trance-like quality to it that sort of kind of puts you in that zone, So it's really kind of an experience. And this one, you did have a lot of the gameplay pieces, but it didn't all probably come together for that thing. And the first one has, stuck in my mind to the point that every game I feel like I play that actually kind of resembles this game, like, any top-down difficult shooter, I always end up thinking about, well, how does this compare to Hotline Miami? So even if there are games that I think that have surpassed it, it really was, I guess, like the top of its genre for whatever genre it was,
Right.
But anyway, so that's most of what I wanted to say about it. I don't know if anyone has any questions about this 3-year-old game, but that was one I played that I thought was pretty interesting.
Nah, I think I'm probably good.
I like the 3-year lag that we're operating on today.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we're actually recording this June 10th, 2015. I
don't know. Maybe both those games were out then. I don't know.
I have no idea.
So, if there was a Hotline Miami 3, do you think you'd play it? I don't think there's going to be, but
yeah.
Is this a style of thing you would like more of?
Yeah, I would probably play it, but since I just played this one, it would probably be about
you would wait 3 more years?
Yeah, probably wait. No, I'd say at least 1 year. At least 1 year before I'd get into it. And I also feel like there are games that have done, I don't know that there's a game that's captured the full experience of the first Hotline Miami, but there have been games that I feel like were much better on the gameplay side that I've played, using that same top-down intensity.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah.
All right.
It's so funny. When I go to my Steam page, it's still marked not interested, even though I already bought it and played it.
Yeah, I'm not interested in this. I just played it.
Yeah, I just played it for 12 hours. Not interested.
Yeah, anyway. Man. All right. Well, Mr. Flex, you've been playing video games, right?
I have.
What video games have you been playing?
Apparently, all the ones I've been playing are indie games.
All right.
So, indie correspondent.
Indie correspondent.
Channeling my inner will this week.
It's a dark road.
Though all of mine came out in 2018, not 2015.
Oh, okay. So you're in the more recent times. So what's been happening on the indie front?
The first one I'll talk about, and the one I spent the most time on, is I played through the first scenario of Frostpunk.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's okay. So my journey with Frostpunk came in 3 acts. And my feelings on it were very different at each stage of this. So I started the game, and it's, for anyone who doesn't know, it's like it's a very grim setting where like I don't know, some kind of ice age or whatever has happened. So like it's very cold, and it's more or less a city builder where you're trying to help these people survive.
Okay.
The extreme cold. And when I very first started, I had no idea what I was doing. And I probably spent like an hour, maybe up to 2 hours, kind of bumbling around, building some stuff. And then things started feeling pretty dire. And I'm like, you know what? If I just restarted knowing what I know now, things would probably be a whole lot different.
Yep.
So this is the first act of my playthrough of being like, they didn't do a great job explaining this stuff. So now that I've learned it, I'm going to start over. So that's what I did.
All right.
And I started over, and after the first hour, things were like orders of magnitude, like going way smoother, like night and day. So these are the same people that made this War of Mine. And I remember having the same thought with that game, which I did not end up starting this War of Mine over, but I remember thinking halfway through of like, if you just kind of had knowledge of this game, it'd probably be really easy. So anyway, I started over.
On this, but I want to let you finish before I jump in.
Yeah. So I started over, and things were going way better. And for like the first half of the scenario playthrough, so probably like 5-ish hours, I was totally digging it. Like the tech tree was interesting, like the scenarios that were happening were interesting. And I know Nate's talked a lot about this game on the previous couple podcasts. So I won't rehash a lot of what he said, but yeah, like just a lot of the decision, like the theme of this game is really interesting. You're basically forced into making like really terrible decisions to like for the greater good. So it's like, oh, things are bad. People are starving and freezing and dying and all this stuff. So like you're pushed to extreme measures to, try and help people survive. So a lot of the thematic stuff I think they do is really cool.
Okay.
And they do. And so like for my first 5-ish hours, I thought it was doing a good job, at least for me, of like walking that line of like, all right, things constantly feel on the brink. So you're like really trying to balance everything and like making a lot of interesting choices to like try and be as efficient and effective as you possibly can. And then felt like there were a lot of tense moments, and like that was really exciting. And then I got to the back half of the scenario. And this is where the third and final act of my playthrough came, which was somehow I apparently got so far ahead of the curve during that first half.
Yeah.
That the second half, I just had like thousands and thousands of stockpiled resources to the point where like I could basically just fast forward and never worry about anything ever again.
Okay.
And
you beat the game. Congratulations.
Yeah. The problem was I beat the game like 6 hours before it was actually over. So I basically just sat there and did nothing for like 5-6 hours.
Okay.
And that felt really boring and pointless.
I can see where that would be kind of boring.
Yeah, so like the wind just kind of went out of my sails during that back half. It's crazy. So like, I guess I just feel like, I don't know if there's just something off with the balance or the progression of it. I'm not sure. It really blew my mind. Cause like I said, the first half, it was like, it felt like it was hitting the right balance on everything. I was just like constantly like up against that line of like, things are really dire. I'm making tough choices, all that stuff. And then in the back half of the game, it was like, nothing matters. I could stop producing food and I wouldn't starve for another 60 days or something crazy. I have like 10,000 stocked food rations or whatever.
Right.
It's like, and then similarly with coal, it's like I can turn this generator, because like coal is super important because that runs your generator, which is what keeps your people warm. It's providing you heat. So it's like, I can run this generator at max power for like a freaking year and I'm not going to run out of coal. It's good.
Huh. That does sound like that there's something that's not quite tweaked correctly in the difficulty sliders.
Yeah. And there are difficulty settings. So to be fair, potentially I could go back and play it on hard. I played on normal, and maybe that would make it more interesting for me. But it's also just crazy that that first false start I had, I was so far behind. And then that second time I was so far ahead.
Right.
And I only played like an hour or maybe an hour and a half that first time. So yeah, I guess it just felt like I never quite hit the right balance. I started way too far on one end, and then the pendulum swinged pretty quickly far to the other end. So I only had that brief moment where it felt right. If that makes sense.
Right, and that's that's kind of weird because like if it's too hard, which it probably should be too hard the very first time that you play through one of those kinds of games, and then you restart. I mean, that's kind of like, as someone who's played a lot of resource simulators, you just sort of kind of play until you reach a point where you're like, man, this is not going well. I need to go back and do X, Y, and Z at the very beginning. And then you restart, and then you do that, and then you get better and better at that loop,
Yeah.
But
that's pretty much what happened.
But the fact that you were able to get to that point after like one restart, that's where I say something doesn't seem tweaked quite right on the difficulty slider.
Yeah, that is kind of curious for me. And I mean, everyone, I guess, will have a different experience with these kind of games. I actually was also doing kind of a mental comparison with this War of mine by the same developer.
I actually think there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah, there are some similarities, and my experience with this War of mine was kind of bad. Like, not super bad. I kind of enjoyed it, but at the same time, like, I was like 10 hours in, and there were mechanics that I didn't grasp right away, like how to heat your house, that had kind of and they had these rolling consequences. So like, I could squeak by to like 10 hours in, and then like my people were depressed, and like I couldn't get them from being sick, and I realized like there were certain building options that were strictly better than others. Like, it was a bummer. It was like, okay, well, really, if I re-rolled this, it would just be easy because now I know what to do.
And I think, I think that's a good point you just said, is that I think both of these games, to a degree, have that thing of, if you know what you're doing, the game's kind of too easy, at least on the default setting. And I think they also, neither of them do a great job at explaining all their mechanics up front. Like you said, in this War of mine, like, you didn't really understand how to heat your house for a while. And I think both of these games, like, kind of don't explain some pretty basic things. Well, and that makes it tough to get started.
That's actually where I kind of differ, because, I mean, I could see how this could happen to somebody, but when I sat down to do Frostpunk, I really, really enjoyed my playthrough from beginning to end. And things, I also have only done the first scenario. I want to rotate through some other games, and then I might very well, because I enjoyed it so much, I might actually jump back in, which is something I don't always do. But I found that, and my playthrough went generally well, but I found that they were very upfront. I mean, the scenario throws a couple curveballs which don't really line up with the game's mechanics. That's something I could see having an issue with. But in terms of just like basic decision making on things like tech and on building placement and stuff like that, the game is I found the game informative enough and flexible enough that like it just, I mean, it didn't seem to me like on my first playthrough I was able to kind of make it work. Like, they were it seemed like the game was always telling you, okay, well, if you pick this law, here are the possible consequences. And you could also you couldn't see exactly what would happen farther down that tree, but like at each point in like the law system and the tech system, they'll tell you, okay, if you pick this, your people will be more hopeful, but they'll also be more discontented. And, here are some possible side effects. And like, I mean, there was some wiggle room within that, but a lot of times, basically, that's exactly what would happen. And I felt like the game was kind of doing that at each step. So within the first like 2 to 3 game days, which is not a lot of time, that's very, very early in, like I had a grasp And there were definitely, I could see optimizations along the way, but none of them, like I didn't get so far off that I felt like any of my decisions were game ending versus something like this War of Mine where the game doesn't even explain like, okay, well, if you don't have 2 heaters, like your people will just get sick. And it happens like very gradually and it's not obvious. Like I had to go look that up outside of the game to say, okay, I have a heater. I have my house boarded up. Why are my people still getting sick? And it's like, okay, well, in winter, you actually need 2 heaters. So it was interesting. I found Frostpunk to be, I mean, you know, obviously however your scenarios play out can affect stuff and there were optimizations, but I found that it was a lot more communicative up front about what each building does, like, you know, how to place things, like how much stuff you're spending, what the tech's going to do, like, there were very few times. I mean, there were times where I said, "Oh, okay, you know, I should have placed my buildings a little bit better," or like, "I should have went this option instead of this option in the tech tree." But none of that was like crippling.
Yeah, and I do think Frostpunk explains better than this War of Mine. But I definitely had when I was playing. I think it was last weekend. I don't know. And Nate was online. And I remember probably just like for 20 minutes straight, I was just like asking him questions. I was like, what does this do? What does this do? What does this do? And none of it may have ended up being game breaking if I didn't have those questions answered, but it was still, I was asking him questions that the game itself, like I would be looking at the tech tree or like a law description or something. And it like wasn't quite descriptive enough for me to like, I feel like make the decision I wanted to make.
All right.
But like you said, maybe it wasn't game breaking and I shouldn't worry about that stuff. But like for me, it's like when I'm making these important decisions, it's like if this says a few people may die, it's like I want to know more detail than that.
You want to know how many people die exactly.
Yeah. And I don't remember if that was one of the things that I questioned explicitly, but like things like that where it's like kind of fuzzy wording. So I definitely remember having a few things, but not, to your point, definitely not as bad as this War of Mine. On that front.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think your opinion is invalid. Like, I could totally see, like, okay, well, if my playthrough hadn't went well, would I have felt worse about this game? But at the same time, like, I was like, well, from the very beginning, you know, and I wasn't like, I didn't hate this War of Mine. I just got frustrated with it because by the time you figured things out, like 5 hours or 10 hours in, like, it's like, well, I don't, you know, losing is not fun. And now, like, I know all this stuff, like, but with Frostpunk, I felt like it was, other than some of the scenario curveballs that kind of pop up out of nowhere, like, I felt like it was pretty on point saying, okay, well, you know, if you go down this tech route, like, this lets you trade wood for coal or something like that.
Yeah. And I think the thing that, because, like, after I restarted, for my first half of the scenario after that, I actually was really enjoying it. And if it kept that up the whole way, I would probably be fairly high on the game. I think it was more, what deflated me more was the back half of the scenario where I just felt so far ahead.
Yeah.
And again, maybe that's a difficulty thing. Maybe I should bump it up. Like, I don't know, but like something felt off there. And those last couple hours were just not very exciting. I wonder if there was like, if there'd be a way they could do like, I don't know, a 2-hour tutorial where you could just like play around and feel more comfortable with the stuff and then be like, all right, like now if you're feeling comfortable with it, like go start on hard or something, or I don't know, like it, I just wonder if there could maybe be a better way to tweak some of that stuff, or maybe just the way my brain works just means that balance is not going to work for me. I don't know.
Yeah, the fact that there is a hard means that there certainly is a lot of wiggle room, like, and it sounds like maybe you just went in to get enough of the game's mechanics where you could do a lot more optimization. I am kind of curious though, like, so what were your, in your playthrough, like, what were some of your tech choices and building priorities? And I guess, you know, at the risk of spoilers for anyone who's listening, like, I'm curious, like, what things you felt like were effective.
So I almost maxed out the tech tree.
Yeah, I did as well.
By the end of the game. So I basically had everything. I got everything in the heat tree. I did a lot in the resource tree because, like I said, my resources were pretty on point. I kid you not, I had at least 30 or 40 like resource storehouses by the end.
Nice.
Like the back 3 hours, I was literally just like constantly building those to store resources. So like that actually became the toughest thing at the very end of the game, is like finding room for stuff because I was running out of room. But I feel like I did a pretty general spread of the tech tree. Like I hit pretty much everything. And I was able to get pretty much everything.
And I guess like a couple things that stuck out to me. And again, if you want to play this game and experience it for yourself, like you may or may not want to tune out. But like, for example, I chose one of the early decisions you get to make is like child labor laws.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose to not have my children work, partly because one of the follow-ups is you can have them apprentice to either your engineers or your doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that having them apprentice to your engineers like sped up research, and that felt like it helped me stay ahead of the curve throughout most of the game. That's one example. Another example.
I put those kids to work.
That's funny.
Jerk.
They were serving soup.
Is the hot houses, I felt like that technology was fine, but not the best investment.
So what did you use mostly for food then? Because I actually had a bunch of hot houses.
I did use that, but based on like how effective the hunting halls were, like at the end, I was like, well, if I had just saved this research and these steam cores like for other things like coal mines, I would have just been just as well off.
Yeah. So how many hunting houses did you need by the end?
I mean, I had hot houses, so I just felt like all those steam cores would have been better.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, because I think your hot houses cap out at like 60 or 70, and your hunting halls cap out at like 50. So you're not, for 2 steam cores, like plus 20 food a night is not that useful.
Yeah. I ended up having a lot of steam cores actually, because I found early on an outpost that delivered 1 steam core a day.
Yeah, that was something I felt like if you had known from the beginning, would have made a huge difference.
Yeah. So I was building a ton of those, what are they called, automatons?
Yeah.
So I had by the end of the game, I probably had 10 of those working at places. I think I put 2 at every resource. So I had 2 at the coal mines, 2 at the steelworks, 2 at the whatever the wall cracking wood making things are.
Yeah, the wall drills.
Yeah, 2 at hot houses and 2 at something else. I just had those automatons everywhere. They were. So
I explored the other direction. That was something I was like, okay, well, if you knew that this was the thing up front, it would make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the steam cores are used in very powerful stuff.
Yep.
As far as the laws, I went fully down the order path.
Okay.
I locked everything down hardcore, patrols in the streets, loudspeakers encouraging workers to work more efficiently, watchtowers, beat down anyone who disagreed.
So you made a fascist dictatorship.
Basically.
That's me.
That's funny, actually, because I also went down order, and this is something I thought was kind of neat about the game is you kind of have to make some of the decisions. I don't know if it's even possible to not pick one of those order or faith kind of ways to go. But I didn't go that far down.
I went basically all the way.
I mean, and there are advantages to doing so, but at the same time, whenever they started stealing food and killing my guards, I was like, okay, I'm going to build guard houses in a prison. The people are giving me no choice. But past that, I was very hesitant to expand my power, and I felt like that was kind of something that the game, I mean, obviously it depends on mechanics and how you play it, but I thought that was kind of a neat theme of the game. Is it's like, okay, you don't have to be a totally evil dictator, but there are advantages. There are advantages to doing so.
Mm-hmm. There are advantages to it. Things were very efficient in my city. I made sure people were doing their work.
Oh yeah, there's probably some commentary that we could make there about that, but we're just going to move past that. So there's been a lot of talk about Frostpunk. I think it's probably time to move on to your other stuff that you've been doing on your indie correspondence tour.
I was curious about one thing, I guess. The whole time he was talking, I was just thinking, because it sounded like for a lot of people, when this game dropped, it seemed to really, I don't know, just really appeal to a lot of folks. And I guess survival as a genre has never, I don't know, it's never really resonated with me, but I haven't really tried that many of them. I mean, I tried Don't Starve, I think, and I tried This War of Mine. And I didn't really like either one of those.
You're talking about survival, like not survival horror?
No, survival games, like I guess kind of that Frostpunk kind of genre in a way. And I guess I'm just kind of curious, and I was trying to rack my brain. I'm like, well, what is it about these things? And the one thing I did kind of land on was that it does seem that you can. In the same way that, like, I remember when I used to play RTS games, anything that kind of has this sort of building progression sometimes, I don't know. I feel like there are times where I'll make a bad decision early on and then it'll kind of compound and become like more and more difficult, or that decision will have really, like, if I actually wanted to try again, I'd have to like rewind like 5 hours or something. And I don't know, I guess, as best as you guys can explain it, I guess, what would you say the biggest draw is of this type of game? I guess, what do you like the most about it?
So like this game, I would say, is kind of predominantly a city builder. So it's going to, like, moment to moment feel pretty different from like Don't Starve or This War of Mine.
Oh, okay.
But I think the thing they do have in common that probably gives them like that thematic survival connective tissue is, and I think what can be appealing about games in this realm is you always feel like you're on the brink, so you're always making very dire decisions about, like, to try and keep yourself alive, so you're like really pushed to make tough choices.
Do you feel like it shares some DNA with like the new XCOMs in that way?
To a degree, yeah. Though the decisions here maybe have more long-term impact. I don't know. I guess they do in XCOM as well. But I think what you alluded to of like what could be frustrating to games to you sometimes is it feels like if you make a mistake early on, it can kind of snowball.
Right.
And I think that is something I experienced with Frostpunk. Is my very first playthrough, it felt like the rough start was snowballing in a negative way. And then in the second playthrough, it felt like the good start snowballed in a positive way, such that I ran away with it at the end. So I think that can happen, but my guess would be a lot of the appeal of this stuff is that it does feel so dire, so you're just like constantly on that line.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be critical at all. I'm just curious,
That's my best guess. I don't know if Ryan might have an additional take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it probably because it was a city builder. Like, it felt like it was scratching that itch for me. Like, you have tech trees and resource management. I think, this developer in particular does a good job of, like, I guess making it sort of personal. Like,
okay.
And then, yeah, there is the survival element. Like, there's like constantly, like, the screen is constantly blue from the cold and the snow, blue and white. And like, they have this little ice effect that sometimes kind of goes across the screen, and it always sounds like you're in a blizzard. So I guess
which gets real gnarly at the very end.
Yeah. And so they do kind of do a good job of setting the scene.
Thematically?
Yeah, thematically. Which, and like Flex was saying, you're trying to kind of survive.
Yeah. And I guess
my favorite stuff about this game might actually be the thematic stuff. I think they really nail a lot of the theming.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. You know, because it's just one of these things where a lot of the games, like some game will come out, and even if it's a game I'm not interested in, like I'll understand like why you're interested in it, Flex, or why you're interested in it, Ryan. And I think these games come out, and like all three of you guys jumped on this one, and I was like, I don't get it.
You know? I think some of that is also a time and place thing. Like this game came out when not necessarily there was a whole lot else coming out, and it got really good reviews.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know, like just listening to you guys talk about it, it actually reminds me a little bit of Banished with the city builder, but everything gets real hard, and you know you're trying to build in the face of all of this like impending, you know, just stuff that doesn't really lend itself towards generating a civilization. So I've had it on my wish list for more than a minute now, so hopefully I'll be able to get around to it and have some thoughts on how those two actually compare in the real world.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, and I would say mechanically, actually, Frostpunk may not even, at least on normal difficulty, may not even be that much more challenging than like a Banished or even like a Roller Coaster Tycoon, which is not quite the same. I mean, I guess some of those games you can set up more positive feedback loops than, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's probably the thing I played the most. The other, or one of the other games I played through Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, aka the new Castlevania.
Cool.
Which this is the game that was kickstarted was Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, I think. But
Okay.
One of their like stretch goals or whatever it's called, was they would also make Curse of the Moon, which Ritual of the Night is more like the post-Symphony of the Night style Castlevania, and Curse of the Moon is more your like 8-bit era Castlevania.
Yeah, this just looks like some Castlevania-ass Castlevania.
Oh, yes, it is, Paul.
Wow, I mean the logo, the art, just all these screenshots. It's like no one tell Nintendo
or Konami.
Or Konami.
Not that Konami cares anymore.
Ooh.
Yeah,
they
this
really
is. Yep, I mean, and it's made by the guy what made Castlevania for a long time.
Okay.
Um,
That explains the similarities.
Yep. He left Konami and made his own little indie studio and kickstarted these Bloodstained games, and so and it shows. Like it totally feels like a Castlevania game.
All right.
And I think it's a really well-made one of those. Like, I've played a handful of Castlevanias from all eras, and I probably like this one. I mean, look, it's no Rondo of Blood.
Okay. All right.
But nothing is. But, like, other than that, I probably like this better than any other of the, like, 8 and 16-bit era Castlevania games.
Yeah.
Like it's just really, it is that game. Like there's nothing like super like novel about it, but it's really well designed and like some more modern sensibilities and just like the level design and stuff like that. Cause it's not mean in the same ways that the NES games were.
Right.
So I thought it was fun, and it actually has 4 playable characters. That have different abilities and traversal abilities, which was fun to play around with, and like different attacks and pros and cons. And they even have like, part of me is almost tempted to go back and play it again because it's not a long game and they have different endings and like when I was playing through the first time, like going through the first couple stages with only the starting character, like there were places I clearly could not reach.
Right.
But then like the way subsequent playthroughs come through that actually kind of continue the story in ways, and you can use some of the other characters from the beginning and that kind of stuff. Like it seems like there are actually some pretty good differences if you do the multiple playthroughs. But otherwise, yeah, it's just good level design, good boss design, like the art design, like, and it controls well, it was fun. Like I thought it was a good time. It's, again, not surprising, but it's a very well-made one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome that they were able to get this done through through Kickstarter, and then it came out, and number one, it came out, which is not always true of Kickstarter games, and it seems like it delivered on what it is that people were kind of hoping for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because I kickstart games every now and then, and I remember when I saw Bloodstained, I mean, it didn't need my support, so I chose not to back it, but I also have been very suspicious of the auteur movement. I think, like, you know, to me, like, these games are hard, they can be time and place, and, like, just because a big name from a Japanese studio, like, is saying, hey, I want to make this game great again, like, it doesn't mean...
This totally could have been another Mighty Number 9. Exactly.
You've got like Mighty Number 9, Final Fantasy Tactics, like some of these games that just haven't delivered. So I've been very suspicious of kind of these auteur Kickstarters, but the fact that this came out and it sounds like it really does recapture that spirit, like, and you know, if these games are good, like, you know, I'll be happy to pick it up retail. It's kind of cool to see that this ended up coming out as a pretty good throwback. Although it is, I think, a different studio than the one who's working on the actual game, the Ritual of the Moon or whatever.
I think it's the same people.
Okay, I don't know for sure. I thought
I shouldn't say anything because I actually don't know. I would imagine there's at least some crossover involvement, even if it's technically a different studio. But yeah, right. I'm not the authority. I don't know.
So we shall see. Yeah, it's a promising sign,
and hopefully, Ritual of the Night also turns out well. Like that, this turned out well makes me more, because I was kind of in the same camp of you. I'm like, this could totally just be another Mighty Number 9 situation, but the fact that this one turned out so well gives me more hope that Ritual of the Night will also turn out well.
Right.
And they, I was actually just had some screenshots up. They, I do think they get like more creative with like the bosses in this game than they would have in the NES era ones. And I think some of that is like they're able to have like more animation and like screen filling bosses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Than they could on the NES, but.
Yeah, and that's really one of the cool things whenever they do these sort of like modern games that are in like an 8-bit or a 16-bit kind of like style, is that you can still do things, because I mean, you're playing this on modern hardware. You can do really cool things with either like, you know, the graphics themselves, like, you know, having some shading behind a jump that just like looks really neat and polished, or just, you know, like you have an expectation for what these games can really throw at you based off of what you played back in those days, and then every so often, you know, the game will give you exactly what those expectations are for a while, but then it can also subvert them in a really cool way, because it's like, oh, by the way, you're not playing this on a Super Nintendo, you're playing this on like a 2018 computer, so booms things, you know, and that's and the games that can do that effectively, like the ones that kind of suck you in to make you feel like you know what the limitations are, but then throw you that curveball, like that's always a really cool moment to experience if the game can do that well.
Yeah, and it was like it felt fresh throughout. So yeah, it was able to leverage the modernness of it in a way that, yeah, like it kept me engaged.
Yeah.
So after I finished that, so the Castlevania that this, in theory, bore the most resemblance to is Castlevania 3. And I had never played Castlevania 3. It's one of the few, like, well-received Castlevanias I had not played. So I started playing Castlevania 3.
Okay.
Castlevania 3 is incredibly mean.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've not played it.
3 lets you switch between, like, the 3 characters?
Yeah, so there are 4, and that's why I think Curse of the Moon does share the most resemblance to Castlevania 3, is because both of them have 4 playable characters.
Oh, okay.
And I think there's kind of an analogy, like, or just like, you can kind of see how the characters match up between the 2 games.
Right.
Because, yeah, Castlevania 3, your main character is Trevor Belmont, but you also play as Sifa, a guy named
Alucard.
like Grant or something, and then also Alucard is playable. And all of them have different abilities and pros and cons and that kind of stuff. And the four characters you have in Curse of the Moon kind of seem a lot like those four characters from Castlevania 3, like mechanically.
Right.
So you can tell they're kind of going and thematically, so you can almost see the parallels there. But Castlevania 3 is a way meaner game. Like I've played, as I mentioned, I've played a good number of Castlevania games, and like I played the original, played Rondo Blood, like those older style ones. Castlevania 3 is a step up. That thing is brutal.
Yeah, I feel like I save stated my way through that game at some point.
Yeah, I have save stated my way through about half of it, and I don't know that I have the desire to keep going because that thing's a harsh master.
Yeah.
And it is brutal in all of those like classic quote unquote NES hard ways that you would think of.
Yep. Well, have you been picking up anything else, Flex, or is that pretty much all that's been going on in your world that you want to talk about?
I played some more Into the Breach.
Okay, you've been talking about Into the Breach enough. We're gonna move on. That's done.
Hey,
it's over.
So Paul,
What?
I am curious. Have you been playing Final Fantasy XIV?
Yes, actually, I have. Odd that you would know these things. Do you have a spy in my computer?
Well, a certain Steffi might have been talking about it on a certain Discord channel.
Yeah, we did pick up and play a bit of Final Fantasy XIV.
I am curious, like, where you're landing on that. Are you like past the honeymoon period, or are you like, I'm going to be playing this game for a year?
I don't think I'm going to be playing it at all. Actually, I'm not to the point yet to where I'm ready to say, all right, done. But I am at the point now to where I'm probably 5-6 hours in, maybe 8. I'm not sure. MMOs are weird, because you just do a lot of running around, and I'm a little tired of the running around, and it feels very fetch questy in a way that's not really enjoyable. I mean, I know some people are like, yeah, well, WoW, you just go and kill 10 boars, but WoW did this neat thing where they'd give you 6 quests in the same area, so you got this like dopamine rush of turning in 6 things at once, where this game is just like, hey, take this to this. All right, now take it to that. Now take it to this. And it's like, okay, I've just been running for 20 straight minutes, and I'm not really getting a lot out of this, but I have to do it because the monsters outside are too hard to fight. So I don't know. I'm not quite sold on it yet, but I do know it's gotten a lot of positive praise. So I want to try and give it a little more time before I make the call to pull the plug.
Okay, yeah, I'll be curious how you land on that. I'm still kind of waiting for the WoW expansion in August, but I have had my eye on Final Fantasy XIV off and on and I actually played it up to like level 15 a while ago, but the guy I was playing with, he ran out of time, so I was like, I'm not soloing an MMO.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem is that when Steph and I started it, even though we picked like the same race, it started us in different parts of the world.
Right.
And since we're doing the free version, we actually can't party up, and it's just like, there's just enough here to where it makes me hesitate to want to dump a lot of money into it, but at the same time, I'm not really getting what I want out of the free experience. So I don't know. I'm still on the fence about it, but I wasn't immediately like sucked in, after the first hour or two. But it is a really gorgeous looking game. I will give it that.
Yeah, I'll be curious, like where you land on that one, because I almost wonder if WoW is just like the more like gameplay, active gameplay, like experience. I mean, Final Fantasy maybe is a bit more thematic, a bit more visual, but I don't get the sense that it's necessarily like faster or more engaging. in any way.
It's also got that issue that, where it's like, for something like WoW, I mean, I put so much time into it that, I know all the websites and all the macros and all the add-ons to just get into that game in like 5 minutes. With this one, it's, I've got the learning curve of the game, but I've also got the learning curve of all the resources outside of the game, which is kind of funny to say, but it's kind of true with MMOs. And, I've started poking around with that stuff. And, like I say, nothing is like super off-putting, but nothing's also quite selling me on it yet. So I'll check back in a couple of weeks and kind of let you know where that goes.
All right. I will be curious.
So, but Flex, did you want to talk about Into the Breach any before we move over to Ryan, or?
What was the question?
Nothing. We're moving on.
I was going to ask.
Did you ask about Into the Breach? Is that what it was?
I was going to ask if you wanted to talk about anything
do this, Paul.
with that. But I mean, I'll give you 90 seconds.
Door.
Just Ryan, you just don't ask him any questions. So
there's this mech called Swap Mech. He's really cool.
Go on.
Places.
Okay.
It's great.
So you have a swap mech, and did you swap the mech with victory and then beat the game with it?
You got it.
All right, great. Ryan, what have you been playing?
Let's see. A couple games. I talked last week about starting Iconoclasts. I finished that not too long ago. I kind of come down on not recommending that game.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What's the what's the 30-second pitch of why you don't think that that's something that people should spend their time with?
Well, I think we talked last time about how it doesn't necessarily have glaring flaws in its gameplay. But at the same time, I don't know that it executes any particular area well compared to maybe other games in that kind of 2D action-adventure style. Its combat is fine, it's fun, but it doesn't really vary a lot, and it's not very deep.
Okay.
Exploration is okay, but it's fairly linear, and the transitions are pretty sharp. And I guess where the game could have stood out is that it has this very expressive pixel art, and it does have a fair amount of storytelling.
Okay.
And I think the pixel art, it's an interesting thing because a lot of games have an interesting story, but they really fail to tell it. This game, I think, might have the opposite problem because it has pretty interesting storytelling in the way that it animates its characters, but then the story is just bad.
Gotcha.
In my view. So I think that could have carried it if it had maybe done something different there, but I found the story very bizarre, very confusing. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So no go on Iconoclast.
Yeah, I come down on the side of I would probably steer away from that one.
Did you did you play Owlboy?
I did not.
Remember?
I never got into that one.
I was wondering if it might, if it would have been comparable to that, because your problems with this sound like my problems I had with Owlboy.
Maybe it just didn't have anything that stood out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So what else you got, Ryan?
The other thing I've been playing is a game called Moonlighter.
I have heard of Moonlighter.
Yeah. I actually backed it on Kickstarter just at to get a copy of the game level.
Okay.
And I have started it after I finished Iconoclast. I'm a few hours in. And so far it's a little early to say definitively. I've been enjoying it. It feels pretty straightforward.
Okay.
So if you're going in looking for a Racketeer, where you're really going to have that involved item shop layer, I don't get that out of this. A lot of the upgrades are fairly straightforward. I do like the dungeoning pretty well. There are a few different weapon types. It doesn't strike me as anything super deep, but you have you have some upgrades. You have different weapon types. You go into dungeons and kind of farm items. So we'll see if it becomes long in the tooth, or if it, it's possible that as you upgrade your shop, that element becomes a bit more dynamic. I'll just have to wait and see where it goes with that.
Okay. Yeah, we were trying to decide whether or not to pick that up, and then noticed that it was not out on Switch yet. And that pretty much made the choice for us to wait a bit and just see where that settled, because it piqued my interest, and and the whole kind of shop thing simulation part, along with the dungeon crawling. I thought that seemed kind of neat, but I really wanted it on the portable console. I wasn't too much looking to get it on PC or PS4, which I think are the only two places where it's on right now. It might be on Xbox, I'm not sure, but they said it was going to come out for Switch in the future, so I figure by then I'll definitely know with enough reviews and stuff coming out. But yeah, it's neat that you've picked that one up and are playing it.
Yeah, and I do think this also would fit the Switch pretty nicely, but I'll let you know if it. There's a steady progression loop, so it might be something you could pick up anyway. But I also, if it does the same thing over and over, that's not gonna feel super exciting.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just wait to see what your final verdict is in a couple of weeks, and then I don't know that they've actually announced a Switch release date, but I can't imagine it would take more than a month or two. So I'll just have to kind of see what's going on then, but it definitely looks neat. So, you been playing anything else?
Well, I've been back on the Vermintide 2 train.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have 150 hours in that or something crazy?
Oh, boy. I think I stopped at 70, and then my brother actually he got interested in it, so rolled another character almost to 30. Hang on a second, and I'll tell you just how long that is.
Oh, boy.
I'm afraid to look. 106.
According to Steam profile. What is it?
Anywho, yeah.
We're going to move just right past that one.
They released some content updates. I do kind of wish I had held off a month or two. This is one of those games where it's getting it on release was kind of a bad idea. Not the end of the world, but you just have to ride the bumps. And that's frustrating.
Gotcha. Well,
that game's been out for a couple months now, though, right?
Yeah, I think it came out in February, March.
March sounds right, but yeah.
And they continue to polish it. It had a bit of a rocky launch in terms of some bugs and issues.
Well, it's only $30? I thought it was more than that. Okay.
I've seen it
only $30, Paul.
Yeah, I know.
$20 several
for 106
times.
hours of gameplay. That's a great ratio.
Dollars per hour, you can't beat that. Huh, okay. For some reason, I thought that was a $60 full release, but obviously not. So, okay. Neat. Well, Ryan, if you don't have any other stuff to talk about, I guess I've been gone for a while. I've got a couple of things that people might find interesting.
What you been playing, Paul?
I've been playing Stardew Valley.
Damn it. Fooled again.
Moving on.
Actually, the multiplayer beta is out for PC. It's not out on the consoles yet. And Steph and I decided to sit down and see how that went, because we've both not been playing Stardew for quite a while now. And, it's real good. There's a couple of bugs, but, it's basically you're on your farm with the second person, and it's all the same game, except you can do everything twice as fast because you have two people, which is amazing. So there's a lot of time coordinating. You go here because we need wood. I'm going to go here. We need coal. Then we're going to build all this stuff, and it's kind kind of addicting a little bit again because you really can, especially since her and I put so much time into it. We're just blasting through this game at a pace that was not intended, but the creator very much came out and said, we're not going to rebalance the game around 2 people because the goal was just for you to have fun with it. So, yes, you are literally being able to make twice as much money and build twice as much stuff, and it's just kind of fun. And we've probably put 55 hours or so into our new farm, and it's already surpassed what we did in our original 2 back a while ago. But they did a good job with that. Yeah, they added a little bit of new single player content. It's not a ton, but it's just enough to where you're like, oh, I'm gonna go check out this thing that I haven't seen. And you talk about like restarting Frostpunk with like everything that and like how to run that. Well, restarting Stardew Valley with knowing how to do everything, you really can just blaze through those systems in a way that's just it's just really enjoyable. So yeah, we've been having a lot of fun with that. I think we're probably getting close to the end of our time with it because the farm's almost done, for lack of a better word. And but still, like that is a free content update that we got another 55 or 60 hours out of, which I was very, very happy with that.
And that's on top of already a lot of hours.
Yeah, so
if you want to see an hour count that puts Ryan's Vermintide 2 count to shame.
309.
Wow.
That's where I've settled out at for Stardew Valley. So
all of a sudden, I don't feel like I've played Into the Breach a lot.
You're probably right about that.
Oh, I am curious. So where have you settled on Into the Breach? I want to compare this to like my FTL.
You mean in terms of time?
Yeah.
I think I'm like 75-ish hours.
Okay, so you're still a Padawan.
Yeah, exactly.
Only 75. So other than that, I did start playing a bit of F.E.A.R 3. Which has been it's that there's definitely a polish difference between F.E.A.R 3 and F.E.A.R 2, which there was a polish difference between F.E.A.R 2 and F.E.A.R 1. So these do kind of get worse as they go on, but this game's not so bad that I'm not going to finish it. But I can definitely tell, like, a lot of the stuff that they're trying to do as far as the scares go, it's just not quite as clever as what the first game was, and it's a lot more, it's a lot more shooty than the first games. It's somehow less environmental, even though it's supposed to be a lot more frightening. There's a lot more blood on the walls, but it's just more like, oh, hey, look at that. Someone came in here and just vomited all over the wall. Let me just keep going into the next room.
That's how you make things scary, right? Just
yeah,
vomit blood on the wall.
And I wish I could put it in like a clear kind of way, but I've been having trouble with it. Like, something about F.E.A.R 1 was actually, it was like legitimately creepy. And then even though they turned all the sliders up in F.E.A.R 3 to make everything like scarier because there's just more of it, and maybe it's just gotten to the point to where I've played these games and it's fine, or maybe it's like they just have gone too over the top. But they've got like these, they've got the normal guys who shoot at you, the Arkham security forces for your standard shooting segments of the game. But now they have like 28 Days Later type zombies that run at you, and they're just annoying. And they try to scare you by busting out of a door and like to give you a cheap jump scare. But I'm just like, God, not you again. And I don't know, like I want to see how this game ends, but I think you could also just play F.E.A.R 1 and stop, and you will have reached the epitome of what the series is trying to kind of get across to you as the player.
I can agree with that.
Yeah. So
and F.E.A.R 3, aka F.E.A.R,
yes,
was not made by the same developer as the first 2 games. So that I would guess that attributes to a lot of the difference.
Yeah, and there's like some weird things in F.E.A.R 3, like some weird difficulty spikes, which don't really feel fair. Like I'm playing it on the lowest difficulty, like I do every game that I play, and and then every so often, like the the security forces guys, like, they'll throw grenades, which is fine, like, whatever. But I've died more than once when they throw a grenade that I swear that they've, like, cooked for a little bit before they've thrown it, because the grenade will land perfectly at my feet, and then it's like I know it's there, and I start to move away from it, and it blows up too quickly, and I'm just dead. And it's like, I didn't. Okay, well, I mean, it feels like a multiplayer death, where you're like, all right, and just reload and get back into the match. But that's happened a few times, and I'm like, I don't know what the game wants me to do here. Like, that dude just sat over there behind cover, blind threw a grenade. It directly at me, and it blew up in the air before it even hit the ground. So I've been annoyed by that a little bit, but that's kind of minor in the overall scheme of things. I don't know, Will, did you finished F.E.A.R 3, right?
Yeah, it's been a while. I remember I like that it was co-op because there's this thing that I do is I play co-op games a lot.
Yeah, it's true.
But so I like that aspect of it. There was some. I remember there being some sort of challenges I was trying to do in it, and those were a little bit wild. I can't remember exactly what I was trying to do. That was probably back when I was in my achievement hunter days.
Yeah,
on the 360 or something. I remember it being fine, but yeah, like you say, I mean, F.E.A.R 1 is really all you need.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the only other thing is that Steph and I have picked up God of War, and we are playing through that on the PS4 with the old tried and true method of handing the controller back and forth. So we're about 4 hours in so far, and that's a real good video game. We're really enjoying it. So I will have more to say in the next couple of weeks whenever we get a little further into it. But yeah, that's I kind of knew what that was, and I kind of expected how that was going to work whenever I got into it. But the feel of that game is a lot smoother than what I was kind of expecting it to be. Although I'm still at the early part of the game where I feel like half the enemies I have to like cheat and just like throw the axe and recall it and throw it again and recall it and just kind of run around because I don't really have the skills that I need to, really go up and fight these guys up close. So, a lot of that's still feeling a little bit not so great, but I've heard that whenever you get a little further and you start to unlock more of the skill tree, then a lot of that gets better. So whenever I get frustrated, I just give the controller over to Steph. She murders everything, and we just move on, which is awesome. So
nice.
But I think that's really all that we've been playing. Did finish Ni no Kuni 2. I bounced off of it, and Steph finished it under duress. And I think I hate that game now. So I kind of want to wait until Nate gets on, and so we can have me and Steph and Nate to talk about it a little bit. But spoilers for a future podcast. Ni no Kuni 2 started out strong and then ended as garbage. That's kind of where I'm landing on that one so far.
Great.
But, yeah.
Well, I am further resolved in my decision to not play that game.
I think that everyone should play the first 4 hours of Ni no Kuni 2. Don't actually pay for it. Just play the first 4 hours. That is the best part of that game. And then
steal it?
Yeah, steal it.
Right.
Pirate it. I'm just kidding. Don't pirate it. But
yeah, don't.
If you could borrow a copy, really, that game starts out so strong, and those first 3 or 4 hours are so entertaining and so this is a breath of fresh air. And then you get to hour number 5 and you're like, okay, well, and then every hour it gets worse and worse until I got to hour number 14. And I'm like, I'm never playing this again. So I'm not. And that's how that worked. But anyway, we'll save most of that discussion for later. But I think that's really all that I wanted to talk about with video games. So I think probably what we're going to do now is we do have a couple of things that we want to talk about in the news. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about the news of the video game world. Stay tuned for that. We'll be back right after this. And we are back to talk about some news stuff. We are adults. We're going to talk about cool stuff. We're going to talk about news. We're going to talk about Steam. As some of you probably have heard by now, Steam is now saying that it's going to allow everything on Steam. They've decided that their moderation just hasn't quite been up to snuff, and instead of trying to get better at it, they're just going to stop doing it. They had a blog post where they kind of lay out a little bit of what their thoughts are, and really the only restrictions that they're saying now is that they're going to take down games that are just like straight up trolling, or if it's illegal. That's pretty much all that they say, which we don't really know what straight up trolling means, because it looks like there's been a couple of games that have already been taken down under that umbrella, so they did leave themselves some wiggle room, but it is kind of interesting in this day and age where a lot of the bigger social media companies that are trying to figure out how to get a better handle on moderation to try to moderate out hate speech and things like that, where you have a platform as big as Steam basically stepping back and going, we've got a whole bunch of opinions here in this office, and we figure, we're going to make someone mad, so we're just going to stop doing this stuff. And that's just pretty going it alone in this internet here that we have today, where we're still trying to struggle, with the very real, the conversation between what is free speech versus what is hate speech, and what is a game versus what isn't a game. Visual novels that are done in half an hour that are just basically hentai. I mean, it's a lot of conversations around it, and Steam seems to have come to the conclusion that for them, their best way to handle this is just to take an almost completely hands-off approach and let the community moderate itself. So that's kind of the quick summary of what's going on there. I've got a few thoughts, but I'm going to open it up to the rest of the floor first. And what do you guys think about some of this?
Well, I have a big opinion.
Oh boy!
And I think you guys kind of already know it, but our global audience doesn't, I suppose.
The international audience does not know Will's opinion.
So, what about the intergalactic audience?
In some ways, I think that this is not an issue that affects everyone, because there are certainly a large number of people who really decide what to play based off of what they see in the game's media, and then they just search the Steam store for the game that they already know they want, and then just buy it and play it. And for them, it's probably not going to affect very much. I guess I have, as the resident ATACS indie correspondent, I do a lot of scouring the Steam store, and I have found some pretty solid games that I otherwise would not have heard by doing this. Some of my favorite games last year, one of them being Rumu, another one being Judge, I don't really recall hearing about anywhere. And so I basically was able to locate those using kind of some tags that pointed to games I knew I'd like. So now I'm thinking with this, and I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work completely. Maybe some of you guys have read a little bit more in depth into it. But, it used to be that there was the green light system. Then there was Steam Direct, where you had to pay like a fee. I don't know if now are they doing away with the fee? I just know that there's less moderation than there was.
I don't know that this is any changes to fees or anything. It sounds like this is purely a change in moderation.
Yeah, and it seems Jim Sterling did a video immediately after this announcement came, because he's kind of the opinion, and I can't say I entirely disagree, that if you sell something, that kind of serves in a sense as an endorsement of that product that you're selling. And to claim that that's not the case is to sort of claim yourself exempt from sort of a rule of, I guess, commerce, that sort of, we wouldn't go into a store, if you wouldn't go to the department store down the street and then, they would claim, well, we just sell this, but this doesn't work, but we just sell it anyway. It's sort of, I think it is tied to the place where it's being sold in a sense. I think the point I made on our Discord channel to me is that, like, this is not a thing that Steam could safely do if they didn't have an extremely safe monopoly position.
Right.
They couldn't just completely wash their hands of any sort of moderation or curation of the things that they sell, unless there was no other alternative to go anywhere. So I imagine that if this indeed, which a lot of people predict, will create a flood of games on Steam, a lot of asset flips, a lot of outright garbage and trash, because, I don't mean to mention him twice in the same paragraph, but, Jim Sterling, that's one of his big things, is he loves, like, scouring Steam and, like, trying to sort of almost serve as the curation that Steam lacks itself. So he'll dig out a lot of these games that are released on Steam without executable files, are released on Steam that are like asset flips and Unity demos and Unreal Engine demos and things like that are released without any sort of change. And, you might say that, that it's not really a big deal, because if people buy them, then they can get refunds and maybe people can review them, but it's just so much hassle for no reason at all, in my opinion. And so I just think it will make trying to find the good games that get released. And one of the things that's been interesting that's happened as a result of this, and some of you guys may see this as a bigger deal than others, is that the Switch, even though I don't own a Switch, has become, apparently over the past little bit, kind of an indie hotspot. Like, a lot of the higher quality indies have been, been released on the Switch, and it seems to actually be a good spot for indies right now. And there have apparently been indie developers that have said that they don't really feel that there's any chance of them getting noticed if they release on Steam. So that could be one maybe bright side, I guess, to this whole debacle. But anyway.
So you come down on, you feel like it's going to pollute, like,
an already polluted atmosphere, even more so. Yeah.
Which, I think that whenever you see, and this is for better or for worse, whenever you see a reduction in moderation or curation, you do see an increase in the quantity of whatever that content is. And in Steam's case, the content is games, right? And I have a pretty big problem with Steam right now, just going in and trying to find something new to play the way that, like, Will talks about. I don't use Steam to try to curate to find me a new game. I use all of the other things that are out there, video game websites and, news sites and stuff like that, just to try to pick what the next thing I'm going to spend my time with is. But for Steam to further reduce its moderation and curation, role, that's going to make it even harder for people to get in there and find something that appeals to their interest, because there will be a lot more, stuff that comes up that, will be of some questionable value. So I think it's a point, sort of sidestepping, the core issue, that you are going to see a lot more stuff on Steam that aren't going to be games that most people enjoy, and it's going to be even harder to sort through that stuff to get to the kind of stuff that you would enjoy. So it almost forces you to go outside of the storefront to find those things, and then really you're just using Steam just to purchase it, but you're not using Steam to do any browsing.
I guess I guess I'll chime in here. And I want to defend Valve a little bit. I mean, I also have mixed feelings about this, but, and you know, I guess let me preface this by saying this is 100% my personal opinion, and I am probably missing some information, but at the same time, you know, I don't have complete information on everything, but at the same time, like, I mean, yes, this is a controversial decision, and I can totally understand why. And I don't think, you know, I think garbage is unhealthy for any platform. So we'll see how that plays out for Steam in particular. But at the same time, it's a really tough problem to solve in different ways. So the first thing is just in terms of curation. I think Valve has always been criticized for everything it's done. So people didn't like Greenlight. People don't like Steam Direct. And I don't think I'm making this up. I feel like I was reading an article maybe as recent as this year where somebody was citing like an indie developer who had some pretty interesting games that somehow didn't make Steam moderation.
I heard about that with respect to GOG and Zachtronics. I've never heard of anybody having problems getting on a game on Steam that wasn't offensive, but like I said, I couldn't have complete information too.
Okay, yeah, you may be right. It may be that it was actually a different platform like GOG, and that would make more sense. But yeah, it just seems like no matter what they do, they're going to get some criticism, and you know, these games will most likely continue to exist on places like maybe Newground or Congregate, like these kind of truly open, where you can find all sorts of bad content if that's what you're looking for. So I don't know. I mean, in some ways I would prefer more curation, but at the same time, I think, you know, they're trying to be more and more open because they get criticized when they're not open. And when you open things up, it becomes a huge challenge to moderate. One of my previous positions that I worked at, I was on an open commerce platform. I was working for a company that has an open commerce platform, and I was working on some of the recommendation systems. And if you want to be open like that, you know, people will always try to exploit, you know, as much as they can. And it's a very difficult, unless you just hand curate every single item, which is a flawed process. Like, it's a very difficult problem to solve. You know, companies are trying to leverage more and more machine learning techniques, which I think Valve says that's kind of where they want to go in doing better content filtering and content recommendations. And if they can pull that off, then that's good for them. But it's, you know, the more open you choose to be, like, the more difficult this problem gets. And I think
there's a lot of gray. You know what I mean? Like, because one, you've got the idea of offensive, and that's what they've been getting pegged on. You know, people will find these games like Gay World and AIDS Simulator and School Shooter or whatever, and people will say, well, you know, what are you guys doing letting these things on? And they're like, oh, okay, you know. And of course, different people find different things offensive. I also think that there's a baseline in terms of like games that are actual games too. You know what I mean? Like, could you get someone to make sure it's not just like a demo of a gaming engine, or that it actually has a launchable executable file, which apparently there have been things that have been released on Steam that don't have that. The only other thing that comes to mind right now is this idea that, you know, that you talk about, not you specifically, but Steam talks about, like, well, someone's always going to be mad, you know, and so maybe this is a way to minimize that. But at the same time, there's a part of me that feels like this idea that someone's always going to be mad, that's just, I think it's an inevitable part or an unavoidable part of building a brand. So for instance, like, I mean, I could be mad that Kohl's doesn't sell basketballs. You know what I mean? And I could be like, ugh, you guys suck, sell basketballs. But like, they have kind of a vision for like what they are. And I think that's interesting. Like when you think about Steam as compared to these other retailers, like you think about itch.io, like that's like the janky, funky indie store. You think about GOG, that's the great old games. They're going to like try and make these games that came out in like the late 90s run on modern PCs.
Get it right, Will. It's good old games.
My bad. Good old games. So like they kind of have these sort of brands, and I think Steam is almost like doing everything they can to avoid that. They want to basically be completely removed. And I guess I feel like that stance is, I don't know if it's maintainable in any real sense. And I don't know if they should try to do it, but of course that's a different question altogether. But I do think it's an interesting thing to observe is that like when you think about Steam, like there's almost nothing that you really think about like you would with good old games or with itch.io. And I think that's intentional,
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I don't necessarily think, I'm not sure how this decision will play out. I think it could even hurt their platform if they do truly get like a lot of offensive junk or just shovelware. Like that could truly be like a harmful thing. But it's, I wanted to kind of point out that this is just it's not an easy problem to solve. And, when they were doing Greenlight, which is basically community, I think it's basically crowdsourcing it. Mm-hmm. I feel like there were a lot of complaints with something like that. So it just seems like in their quest to try and be an somewhat open platform, they kind of get beat up no matter what angle they take. And this is perhaps not a completely invalid position for them to experiment with.
Yeah, and it's hard, man. I remember with Greenlight, there were these groups that got identified that were like Steam groups, and people could find them and they'd say, we'll get your game approved on Greenlight. And so basically they had these large legions of followers. And then if you paid them a certain amount of money, I can't remember exactly the way it worked, but if you paid them a certain amount of money, then they would get their legion of followers to upvote your game or to vote for your game on Greenlight. And so it was like basically circumventing the whole idea of the program. And it's hard to dodge stuff like that,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then you also had like, even for one of their more visible games, like the $1 billion underground, CS:GO betting thing that they had going on, and I think yes, it's real hard. But to me, whenever I'm looking at, especially their press release and, some of this like more official communication, they've almost just went, yeah, this is real hard. We're going to give up. We'll try again later, but for now, just whatever, just if it's illegal or if it's just trolling, yeah, we'll take that down. Just for them to give themselves an out, kind of. But other than that, yeah, we're going to rely on the community. And it's like, I don't think you can just give up on this problem, because if you do, I do think in the long term it will hurt your platform, and it'll hurt your platform in a way that like a bunch of other companies have started to put their stuff on different launchers. I mean, we talk about GOG and itch.io, but there's the Epic Games launcher, which I was just informed about. There's the Battle.net launcher, which has Activision stuff on it now.
Yep.
And Origin.
Uplay, Origin.
So, like, if Steam, yes, I do think Steam has a near monopoly on, like, the PC sort of front right now, but I don't think that this decision is going to help them maintain that lead over their competitors. I think in the long run, it's probably going to hurt them. So
very possibly.
So there's a bunch of words on that issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess just as a side note, like for me personally, when a game is available on GOG, I've been leaning more and more towards getting it on GOG, partly because I like their license model more than like the Steam EULA.
That makes sense.
It's very strange, the games that appear on GOG, because I was like poking around at some of the games on my wish list, and like half of them are on GOG and half of them aren't, and they're all games that are released this year, and it's like, I don't know why that line's there.
Yeah, they don't have as much content, and maybe that's from a developer side, or maybe that's from them being more tight with their platform. It's hard to say.
And it's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, even with that game, the Zachtronics game, where GOG looked at it and they said, "I don't think this will appeal to our audience." I mean, I think that's cool that they feel like they have an audience, Whereas but then of course they learned that no, their audience actually was interested in this game, so maybe they needed to revamp their ideas about who used it for.
Yeah, it's curious because. Yeah, it was. So, Frostpunk is on GOG and Subnautica is not. And those are two games that both came out earlier this year and got, similar review scores. So I guess maybe they feel like Frostpunk is more of, an old-school style game, so that fits in with the GOG crowd because it's, good old games.
I mean, I've only got, 10 games on GOG, so I can't claim to be a part of the GOG, warrior.
Yeah, so it is interesting. And then Valve, on the other hand, is, of course, just throwing their hands up in the air and saying, we don't know how to deal with this. Let it all in.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with DRM, too, between GOG and Steam, because I think everything on GOG is DRM-free. And so that might be some of that.
Maybe, the developers or publishers of Subnautica don't want to release a DRM-free version of that game. So maybe that's why it's not on there. It
which
could
is
have
funny.
nothing to do with GOG.
Well, I just looked it up, and apparently Subnautica is DRM free anyway. So I have no idea why Subnautica.
Never mind.
No hypothesis proved.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, well, I think that's probably going to just about wrap up our discussion on Steam. So I guess we'll see what folks are planning on playing next. So, Mr. Will, what you got coming up?
Well, I'm actually thinking, and I don't want anybody to get super hyped or get really high expectations because this is really, really far out of my wheelhouse.
I'm hyped.
I'm thinking of trying The Witness next. And probably I will also continue playing State of Decay 2, Grim Dawn, and Serious Sam's Bogus Detour.
All right, we've heard a bunch of hour counts this episode. What's your Grim Dawn count?
Grim Dawn count. Currently, let me find this. 240.
All right.
Not bad.
I mean, I'll do what I can,
That's right. Mm-hmm. I think that my Grim Dawn hour count's 2. I know I played that game.
So, dude, I mean, together, we make up 242 hours of Grim Dawn.
I remember that time.
You've been playing State of Decay?
Yeah. Well, maybe one session of about an hour, so not a lot.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about that when you're farther along.
Yeah, once I get a little bit more meat to my opinions, I'll definitely share.
All right. Flex, what about you? What you got coming up on your 2-play list?
Speaking of Subnautica, that's, I think, the next, that's going to be the main thing I'm going to be playing next, and I have a whole laundry list of shorter backlog games that I'd like to get to as well, but of which of those I will play is to be determined. So Subnautica will be the main thing going forward.
All right, Ryan, what about you?
Continue playing Moonlighter, and then there's a good chance I will either start Into the Breach or pick up God of War if I'm able to knock out Moonlighter.
All right. I'll be doing a lot of traveling for work in the next couple of weeks. So I think I'm probably going to be putting some time into Persona 4 Golden on my second playthrough there, and also picked up Celeste for the Switch and have been putting some time into that. So hopefully I'll have more to say about both of those in the next couple of weeks. And while I'm home, I'm sure I'll be playing some God of War with Steph. So those are the 3 things that I'll probably be doing for the next little bit. And yeah, that just about wraps up our episode. We have been adults, so I'm talking about cool stuff. This has been episode number 39. We're going to be back in your feed in about 2 weeks with the big episode 40. So tune in for that, and we will see you then.